All right, so today I got a good friend of mine, entrepreneur, former light heavyweight UFC fighter, Mr. Matt Van Buren. How's it going, dog?
Good to see you, Roger Chan.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Anytime, buddy.
Yeah, man.
Happy to
So
be here.
awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. We're finally doing this, man.
Yeah.
Been talking about it for a while, but anyways,
Awesome.
if you want, I guess kind of tell everyone where you're from, where you grew up, a little bit about like your childhood and.
So I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, Southeast Virginia, born and raised. I wouldn't really call it. It's not city. It's definitely not big city, but it's not really like country either. You know, it's kind of like suburbs. So, I grew up in a Christian household. Both parents in the house. I had two brothers. I was a middle child. Yeah, me and my brothers were knuckleheads as kids and got in trouble. And
How many brothers?
I got two brothers.
Two brothers. So where do you
Two.
fall within that order?
I'm the middle. So I have an older brother, younger brother.
Did y'all fight a lot when y'all were kids?
Can you adjust this thing? Yeah, we did. My older brother used to whip me a lot, and then one day I whooped him, and then he never got me after that.
That's usually how it goes.
But
right?
yeah,
It's always the older one.
my little brother, he was so much younger than us at the time, you know, so it was like.
So you get
I don't
along
really
with them pretty
think.
well right now.
Yeah, I get along with him good now. We didn't get as long. There was a big age gap when we were younger, you know, so like what you're doing when I was 17, I think he was maybe 12 or something, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it was a big age gap when we were growing up. But, you know, as we got older, we got closer and had more stuff in common.
Cool. You know, it's weird because, like, I've known you for a little bit now, right? Like,
Yeah.
For several years now. And, like, I've never really asked you this because I don't know why. It's not because, like, I guess I didn't really think of it. But, like, I've known you. Like, I know you were a fighter, like, in the UFC. But then, like, I never knew, like, how exactly did you get into that? Were you always fighting as a kid? Or, like did you just think, oh, I think I can make some money fighting? Or I want to, like, fight the champ? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, so actually I didn't it's kind of a crazy story, really. Like, I wasn't an athlete in school at all. I smoked weed all the time, like heavy amounts of weed, like more than I care to admit. And it's just a shame because I would have been such a better, like, looking what I achieved in a short amount of time. Like, imagine how far I would have gone if I would have been an athlete or whatever, you know. But I got hit by a car when I was 12 and broke my leg, like, really bad. And it probably took 2 years before I made a full recovery from that. You know, I was in a wheelchair for 6 months, and then I had a hard cast, like, from my foot all the way up to my groin. I had a full leg cast, and I wore that for like a year. So it was like a year and a half from the wheelchair to the leg cast, and then after that, you know, so it was like 2 years from the time it came off where I was rehab, like a walk-in at least. So at that time I was 14, so that kind of messed up my sports too as a kid. And then when I was 14, like, I hung out with a lot of older kids in my neighborhood. Like, I say older, but they were like 16. But when you're 14 and like kids are 16, it's a big difference back then. You know what I mean? So they were smoking weed. I started smoking weed, and, you know, we were just getting in trouble. I actually joined the wrestling team in 11th grade. If you don't know this, because I'm a pretty good wrestler now, but I actually joined the wrestling team in 11th grade. I had 2 matches all year, and I got pinned in both matches in like 30 seconds or like less than 30 seconds. Like, it was embarrassing. Like, I think I quit the team. But we used to like street fight and stuff as kids. We'd have like boxing matches, like backyard boxing matches at the parks and stuff. And I always did pretty well. so we always, like, almost every weekend, somebody would have a party and there would be like a fight. So we did get in like street fights quite frequently. I always liked to fight. And then I had a buddy. So I had a buddy who, around the time I started training to fight, I was about 20 years old. And a lot of guys that I was hanging out with were getting in the wrong shit. You know what I mean? Fucking going to jail, getting in trouble, getting addicted to hard drugs. And I'm like, I got to find something constructive to do with my life. You know what I mean? And I was going to community college, but I hated school. I was terrible at school too. Like, even to this day, it's hard for me to. It's crazy because I'm like such a like it's physical stuff is so easy for me, right? Like, you like go do these workouts, or whatever. Like, I'll kill it. It's nothing. But for me to like sit down and like read a book or study stuff on the computer or like try to learn stuff, it's so hard for me. I don't know. I've always been that way. I just don't have the attention span for it. And that's some things I struggle with mainly as an entrepreneur, you know, is like, it's like if it's physical work, it's so easy for me to do it. So I feel like I should have been a roofer or something, but there's still stuff you have to learn. You know what I mean? And it's always been hard for me, but physical stuff is always easy. And, so I had a buddy in Virginia Beach who did some kickboxing fights, like Muay Thai kickboxing. And he had some fights, and I was like, dude, you know what? I was like, I want to start training. I want to take some fights because trying to stay out of trouble, have some fun. You know, I was like, I don't mind fighting. I was like, I want to do some MMA fights because we used to always watch UFC. You know what I mean? And I was like, I'm down to do some MMA fights. And so I just started training like every day, and I started falling in love with it, and took a couple fights, and I won. And it was like beating dudes up, and I was like, man, this is way better than a real job. I was like, I'm just gonna be a professional fighter and make millions of dollars. That's what I thought at the time. And the more fights I took, the more fights I won, and the more disciplined I got with my diet and training and everything. And then, you know, from the time I was 21 years old until I pretty much retired at 31, my entire life and every decision I made was based on me being a better athlete and a better martial artist. And all I did was compete. And I ate, slept, and breathed it for 10 years, you know?
Yeah.
So
you know how like in the sport, they have, you got like your you got your strikers and you got your grapplers. Did you like identify with one side or the other, or were you kind of like more of a mixture of both? What did you consider yourself?
Yeah, I was definitely more of a striker, just being tall, but I also didn't have that wrestling base. You know what I mean? So I didn't have the wrestling background that a lot of guys that were wrestlers or college wrestlers. So I couldn't really be I couldn't really be a grappler or wrestler when I just was 10, 12 years behind a lot of these guys. You know, some of these guys have been wrestling since they were 5 years old. And now we're grown men at 21, 22. So,
but you know how to bang, though.
But I know how to bang. And I always, you know what I mean? And I was tall and long, and I always, I knew how to bang, and I'd always throw, and I knew how to throw.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I started learning wrestling at first for defense because nobody wanted to bang with me. You know what I mean? They just all wanted, they get hit and they want to take me down. So I had to work heavy on my defensive wrestling. I hired a guy. My first real wrestling coach was a guy named John Cerritos. He's like I think he wrestled in college. I can't remember all his background at this point. But I think he was an NCAA wrestler, wrestled in college, and he was a college wrestling coach, local at Old Dominion University. I think he was coaching there. It was our college back in Virginia. And I hired him like $50 a private, like. And I would buy private lessons with him as much as I could afford, you know. And I would just have him come in like a couple times a week and just teach me how to wrestle defensively. And he really helped progress my wrestling ability pretty quickly. Getting to work with him on a one-on-one basis and just.
So you knew from like an earlier age that you were already investing in yourself as kind of like that stepping stone to like further propel yourself for the future, right? So I guess whenever you got out of the fighting, like, did you go straight into entrepreneurship, or what led you to that? Like, how did you know that you wanted to do what you're doing today, or was it another just kind of by chance thing? What led you towards the entrepreneurship route?
Necessity, really. I mean, I didn't have a choice.
But I mean, they have a lot of 9 to 5 jobs out there, right? Like, you
Yeah,
didn't
but what
consider
am
that?
I? But at 32 years old, when you have no real work history
Right, okay.
and you have no real skills, like who's gonna hire you, paying you any kind of money? What are you gonna get a job doing? I was teaching fitness and martial arts, but unless you have a social media presence, you're not really making any money teaching fitness and martial arts. Unless you have to learn the social media side, which I completely neglected when I was fighting, which is a huge mistake. Obviously now, knowing what I know now, but because I could have built I would probably have a massive social media right now if I went hard on it from when I started and documented everything, and then getting on the Ultimate Fighter and all. But I was just very barely posted on social media the whole time. I just wasn't into it. But yeah, I mean, it was really just necessity because there's no options. You know what I mean? And I never dealt well with bosses because, part of me, I guess, is the fighter in me or being stubborn. Yeah. But you always, every time you have a boss too, they're always a fucking asshole, and they act like they're better than you because they're your boss and like trying to talk down to you, and that's very hard that's hard to deal with for anybody, but it's especially hard for a 6'5" former UFC fighter who had a 10-year of just like trying to be the fucking man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like trying to, you're talking about, living like the elite alpha male life, trying to be a fighter. And then it's like, you're trying to go to a workplace where this little fat dork who's like, thinks he's above you because your boss, like trying to talk down to you. It's like, bro, I'll slap the shit out of you.
Right.
So that is one side of it. But the other side of it was nobody was going to pay me any real money because I didn't have any skills, rightfully so. It's like, what did you do for the last 10 years? It's like, I fought people in the cage. And like, okay, well, we'll pay you $15 an hour.
Right.
Like, you start at the bottom. Yeah. It's like, so there was I knew. So when I first started getting out of fighting, I found like Grant Cardone. He was one of the first big guys I found on social media. And I started following him, and a lot of his stuff really resonated with me. And, he was just talking about people always talk about doing what they love, right? Like, you have to do what you love for a living. You'll never work a day in your life, right? Like, you hear people say that. But we both know, we're grown men, right? You have a family to support. I don't have a family, but we have fucking bills, right? We live in America. We live on a financial planet, right? You need money. You have to have money, especially if you have kids. Mm-hmm. And so that was one thing that I never really thought of that perspective before until I heard Grant say, he's like, you don't need a fucking job you love. You need a job that's going to pay you some damn money. And that's where I was at in my life. I was like, dude, as long as it's legal, I was like, I don't care what I do. I just need to make some money. I'm just not going to break the law or like whore myself out. You know what I mean? And so as long as it's ethical and legal, I'm going to do it. And I knew I had to get into sales because I knew I wasn't going to make any money doing anything other than high commission sales. And Grant was a high commission sales guy, and I followed him, and he always talked about sales. And I was like, yeah, I'm trying to be like these guys making 200, 300 grand a year. I was like, I don't want to make 50 grand a year, 80 grand a year. I'm like, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what I mean? Money gives you options. And
for sure. Yeah.
People that say money doesn't buy happiness are so full of shit. We both know that. I mean, anybody says that, they just quit. They say that because they quit trying to make money and they gave up.
Yep.
Because I can tell you, I've made 50 grand a year, and I've made far more than 50 grand a year. And I will choose the year of making far more than 50 grand a year every year than the year where I made 50.
Yeah.
For
sure.
Yeah.
I remember that. Like, I was kind of in the same boat too. Like, when I remember my first sales job that I had, and I was selling cell phones at the kiosk in the mall, and I remember my paycheck for the week, like, it was like $1,200. I was like 17 years old at that time.
Yes.
$1,200 for 1 week's for a 17-year-old, $1,200, that's a lot of money. That's like more than what any of my parents were making in 1 week.
Dude, I would have been pumped to make that at 25 years old, right? Man, a broke fighter.
No, so that would like kind of open my eyes. I was like, okay, this sales thing, I don't have to like exactly trade my units of time for a specific dollar amount. It's just how much I sell, right?
Right.
So that kind of opened my eyes to sales and the whole entrepreneurship. And I've just been involved in sales ever since, and as an entrepreneur ever since that. But, you know, coming from, I guess, from your background, what would you like? Were there any skills that you saw overlapped, or what were some of the bigger challenges coming from fighting into the world of entrepreneurship? Would you say from your point of view?
For me, it was a lot of personal development. You know, you have to understand, like, people that have never lived a life don't understand. And so while I've never been to prison or jail, I would kind of equate it into like a similar thing. You know, like when you go from literally sleeping and breathing mixed martial arts, and that's all you know and that's all you do. I mean, there was years in my life where I didn't hang out with anybody that wasn't a fighter. And fighters are a different breed of people, right? You got to be you're a unique individual to consistently train to go out there and get smashed by some badass dude for like little to no money and just live poor. Like we literally were poor. Like when I say I lived in the gym, I literally lived in the gym, like upstairs in a dorm room with 6 other fighters, prison style. There was 3 beds on this wall and there was 3 beds on this wall. It was literally one room with 6 beds in it. And we had like we had a Bunsen burner at the gym in California and a grill outside. But we would like, dude, I had 1 plate, 1 spoon, 1 fork, and 1 knife for like a year and a half. And I used it for every meal, and I would just wash it in the mop bucket sink at the gym every day. I did that for a year and a half. I had 1 plate, 1 fork, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I just would drink water out of a gallon jug every day.
Yeah, and that's like sometimes, like you and I know this, you just got to pound sand for a while until you actually get any type of result back. Right. So like that makes sense whenever like we can talk about that because like we like as entrepreneurs, you kind of know that. Right. Mm. So, you know, you have your one, as you mentioned, you have that one aspect where it's the mental part. Right. And then you have the second aspect where you're able to more put your body through the tough physical work. But then when it comes to the mental side of things, it's a complete different ball game. Right. So, you know, if you take the average Joe out on the street, what is it do you think that separates someone like you who can actually deal with the mental side and the physical side to pursue entrepreneurship than the average Joe? How come most of society can't do it? What do you think that is that differentiates like the entrepreneurial mindset with the average Joe?
Most people as a whole are mentally weak. Okay. And mental toughness is like physical toughnness and like getting in shape, right? You can become more mentally tough. You know what I mean? Andy Frisella, who's a famous entrepreneur, anybody who follows knows him. I mean, he's written a book on mental toughness. He talks about it all the time if you listen to his podcast. All these successful guys talk about it. That's why he created the 75 Hard program. You know what I mean? The Live Hard program. People think 75 Hard is a physical fitness program. It's not a fitness program. It's a mental toughness program. You know what I mean? And so mental toughness is something I still have to work on to this day, even though like people be like, what? Like, yeah, like I'm far more mentally tough than the average person, but I'm a long way away from where I want to be and where I need to be. And I know that. And so for me, it was personal development. Like I said, I equate, even though I've never been to jail or prison, like being a fighter for 10 years like that and eat, sleeping, and breathing that life, it's kind of like equivalent to like being in prison for 10 years and then you get out and then it's like you're in the real world, you know? But it's like kind of weird in a different way because it's like, at one point in it's even like almost worse than that in a sense because like I went through a really bad depression when I retired from fighting. Like people, like very few people could ever relate to like what I went through, like physically and emotionally to transition from fighting to the real world. So you have to understand, even though I wasn't like a famous UFC fighter, and I didn't have a whole lot of success. At one point in my life, I was like the fucking man though for a little while. You know what I mean? Like I would walk into Mandalay Bay and there was 30 or 40 people there like trying to take a picture with me, trying to get me to sign. They have like pictures of me printed out like in gloves and like all this stuff, and I'm just like, dude, I'm just Matt Van Buren from Chesapeake. You know what I mean? I just like to fight. And it's like people wanting me to sign autographs, sign pictures, sign posters, sign gloves. Like I was getting fan mail. You know, it wasn't a ton of money, but at the time, like I think bigger now, but at the time, still a lot of money. But at the time, I was like, you know, I made like $105,000 in like 6 months. You know, it's like I'm fucking rich. You know what I mean? Right. Like, and so, but like in a sense, I was, because I had money, I had no debt, but I also had time freedom too. So you have to understand, for years I lived a life of financial freedom that most people will never experience. Not only did I live a life of financial freedom most people will never experience, but I was doing what I truly loved. You know what I'm saying? Like for those time in my life, like if I was one of those people, like if you could be doing anything right now, what would you be doing? I'd be like, bro, I'm a fucking cage fighter. That's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm doing. And so for years, I lived in California. Like I would train in the morning. I would go train martial arts in the morning, get my workout in. And then me and my buddies would go ride motorcycles all day. We go ride in the mountains. We go to the beach. We're here on the beach, take a nap, whatever. And then we come back and we train again at night. And we didn't have a job. We didn't have a boss. We had 60 grand in the bank and no debt. And all we have to do is work out twice a day.
Just chilling. And
then, oh, you're going to fight in 2 months. Like, cool. You're going to fly me to freaking wherever. You're going to fly me to Boston, and you're going to pay for my hotel and put me in a 5-star hotel, and you're going to pay for all my meals, and you're going to give me a check for 40 grand, and I get to beat this dude up in front of his family, and then everybody's going to want to buy me beers after, and all these girls are going to want to hang out with me. It's like, dude, you're pretty much a rock star, you know? You're right. Just like a very, very underpaid rock star, you know? And so from living that life to fucking going flat broke and having no idea what you're going to do and having no skills is a very tough pill to swallow, you know?
Yeah,
so,
no, I bet.
I
mean, we kind of see it, like, in the UFC, like, perfect example. Like, a lot of times, like you mentioned, like, some fighters, like, especially if they're very successful, they don't know when to step out of the game.
It's hard to walk away,
yeah.
Right?
Like Tony Ferguson, prime example, you know? Like,
it's, I mean, because when you've done, and that's the thing, it's like, I think it's a big part of why I have fulfillment issues in my life, is because once you've done something like that and like done that, like what's left after that? The only thing that I can think of right now that could equate me to that, and people are just like, oh, you have to bury that and move on, and like, and yeah, I agree you do, but it's very difficult, right? It's very difficult to do that. And once you've lived it and experienced it for years, you know? And so the only thing that I could think of that would come close to that is if I had like $10 million. You know what I mean? Like if I just made a lot of money, was real successful, and then I had just true financial time freedom, I could do what I want when I want, and I had money, I could help people, I could, you know what I mean, pay for my buddy to take a week off work and just come to Europe with me and hang out, whatever. You know what I mean? And you can make differences in the community, help people with charity stuff, whatever, because you got money. That's the only thing I could think of that would maybe like give you that type of fulfillment, because it's just,
you know,
it's just very difficult. You know what I mean?
Like, no, because you brought up the fulfillment part, and I think that is more important than the actual dollar value, right?
Right.
Because think about it this way: a man who's on an island, stranded island, billionaire on an island, but doesn't have access to any of his bank accounts, no society, no technology, nothing. Is he wealthy or is he poor? At that point, on the island, he's poor.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
What would make him wealthy? Maybe a bottle of water and a can of soup. Mm-hmm. That would make him wealthy, right? If he's in that situation. What would fulfill him at that moment? So, you know, I think that's a big part of it, is why a lot of people sometimes they start chasing the dollar amount rather than looking, you know, at life itself. You know, you have people who, like, in third world countries, like some really dirt poor guy who's just smiling in his hammock on the edge of the beach, going fishing. Like, he's the wealthiest man in the world, and in his mind, like, he's living his life. But then I'm
envious of people like that.
Right?
Honestly, I'm envious of people that make like $45,000 a year, and they're like coaching their kids softball, and they're like, "There's nothing I'd rather do. I wouldn't take a job for $200,000 selling insurance or doing this." And I'm like, I'm fucking jealous of that
fulfilled.
Guy. I wish I could be like that sometimes,
Yeah, and really,
because
that's kind
it's
of
just
like what we're all after, right?
Yeah,
is the fulfillment. So anyways, like, what do you I guess, what are you up to nowadays? Like, what's business like, and what are you getting in? What are you currently into? What are you getting into? And what are maybe some projects that you're working on?
So currently my main focus is on Medicare health insurance sales. I have a couple agents that write business that I make overrides off of, but my main focus is really I sell Medicare plans and help people with their Medicare. That's my main business. I do pretty good at it, and like, I was number one salesman out of 700 in the state of Texas in my agency of 1,500 agents, and I'm top 5. I'm always top 5 overall out of 1,500 agents in my agency in production. And then I have a watch business too. I sell high-end watches, like boutique watches, Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Panerai, brands like that.
Okay.
So
what got you into that?
How
did you get into that?
Yeah. So when I was living in Florida, I met a guy who was into the watch business. And he was very successful at it. And he was I didn't really know anything about watches at the time, except they were expensive and I couldn't afford them. And even if I could afford them, it probably wasn't a good idea. But
for the ones that you deal with, I mean, they're not known like Timex or Casio. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like those watches too. I had a G-Shock for the longest, but what are you dealing with, like Rolexes, APs?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think the most expensive watch I've sold was $65,000, and on average, some of them are $15,000 to $30,000.
You know what's interesting that I've heard, and I don't know what this is, but I've heard that Rolex, like, they're starting to become like the Ferrari of like the watch world. And by that I mean, like, they won't let you get a watch unless you bought this car, that car, this car in the past, and then they'll put you on the waiting list if you buy this much jewelry. What's going on with that? Like, are they not just manufacturing enough, or is the
it's always been a supply and demand issue with these watches. The demand far outweighs the supply. Just like with certain cars, like anything that goes over MSRP, it's a supply and demand issue, because if the Rolex store was full of Rolexes that people could walk in and buy, there wouldn't be a list. There wouldn't even be a gray market. So I'm what's considered a gray market dealer, right? So if you want a brand new Submariner, Rolex does not sell their watches over MSRP, right? It would cost you like $11,200 or something with tax. But that same brand new watch on the gray market, somebody will pay $14,000 for it, because it's a supply and demand issue. They want it, and they want it now, and they don't want to wait, and they don't want to maybe never even get one because they get on the list and they don't get one. And so all these watches sell, not all of them, but like certain Rolexes and certain APs and high-end sought-after watches, they all sell over what the dealers will sell them for on the gray market, because it's a supply and demand issue, just like cars, right? Or even houses. Like a couple of years ago, we were doing that with houses where people were getting into bidding wars, because it's a supply and demand issue. There wasn't enough houses inventory on the market. And for as long as I've been in the watch business, which is about 4 years now, it's always been that way, and that's just kind of how it is. They just don't produce enough of these units to satisfy the demand of the clientele.
Do you see that as being a Rolex specific issue, or is it pretty much everything that's high end?
All the high end brands, yeah. Like, you're not going to just walk into the AP store over there in Dallas and be like, I want a Royal Oak Offshore. They'll just like look at you kind of
unless you're
funny.
Drake, though, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, if you're like a celebrity, Yeah, you probably get one. But
It seems like Drake's giving out a Rolex at every UFC event.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, he gives his favorite fighters Rolexes.
Oh, I
At least from what I heard. Yeah.
Pay attention to that. I have no idea, but
Okay.
mighty generous to him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I want a Rolex too, but if I do get one, I'll get it from you though.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, these dealers, they're like, what I've heard. I don't know how much you know of this to be true. That like I've heard just from reading around that you can even walk into a Rolex store and if they have a watch in the display, like you can't even buy that. Like,
yeah, a lot of those are like. Some of them don't even have like the movement in them from what I've heard. Like it's a real watch, but they don't actually like have the movement in them. You know, I don't know how true that is, but I would imagine it's probably true if I've heard it from several people. But yeah, they have display watches that they are either no movement in them or they're just not going to sell it either way because it's a display. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, if they should,
it's like they're like the only store where like their salesmen literally are there to sell nothing. They have nothing to sell.
That's so weird.
It's like you walk in and talk to them, and then they're just like, yeah, well, we don't have anything.
I want like, do they make commission? Like what? Like
I would think they do. You would think they have to.
Because if they have nothing to sell, why would you even want to go to work? It's weird.
Well, they obviously got to be getting paid a salary.
Yeah.
Because they're not selling that many watches.
Right.
So they have to be on salary, you would assume.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure they get commission too when they do sell.
Well,
but
yeah, I'm not a watch salesman. So
it's not hard to sell them. So I don't know how much their commission
true.
really is. Because it's not a money issue. You know what I mean? Like if they had 10 Submariners right now, I mean they could sell them all in 10 minutes. They could literally, if they got a shipment in of 20 of them right now, they could make 20 phone calls and get rid of all of those. And so it's not like it's a money issue. It's a weird thing. Like they give them to who they want to give them to. You know, it's not like they're going to give them to the guy. Oh, this guy's got more money, so he's ahead of you in the line. It doesn't work like that. They don't even.
Who they built relationships with.
Yeah, it's a relationship. It's kind of it's a kiss ass game.
That kind of sounds very similar to the whole situation with like the Porsche GT3 RSs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't get them anywhere, and if you do find them at the dealer, they're like marked up like to hell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you heard that guy Manny Khoshbin?
Mm-mm.
He's like some billionaire dude. He's got like a whole. Anyways, you can see him on YouTube. But I heard he gets pretty much like any Porsche he wants. He can just go anywhere and like. It's awesome, you know.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
when you have
guys
those relationships, then you can.
Guys with status like that, for sure, they can make stuff happen, you know.
Yeah. So, do you have any like projects that you're working on right now that you're trying to get off the ground, or any like side hustles besides the watches?
Man, you know, I've gotten spread thin over the years doing so much different stuff. You know, we've talked about that. You've helped hone me in on that, actually. And so I do want to start getting my social media going more, you know, making reels, doing a podcast and all that stuff. So I really want to get a podcast going by the end of the year and just being more active on social media and building the social media. But right now I'm just trying to, because I tend to drift with different stuff. I was breeding dogs for a while, and I'm at the tail end of getting my hands completely washed to that. And so what I've learned is me just mainly focusing on Medicare and doing the watches on the side is the best bet for me right now. And then, you know, I think the next step is focusing more on some social media and stuff other than that, man, there's only so many hours in the day. Like I just work all the time, you know? And so yeah, I mean, you know, you've done Medicare, you've been in sales. It's a lot of work, man.
For sure.
Like just Medicare, even a lot of times I just like don't even feel like fooling with the watches because it's just so much work, and then dealing with customer service or dealing with an assistant or whatever, and then
certifications.
Continuing education.
It's a mess.
Licenses, you know, and then on the other side is being a business owner. Then you got to worry about your taxes, your write-offs, fucking QuickBooks, and this and this. It's a lot, man. But this year I'm hiring a bookkeeper to do everything. I don't care. I'm just gonna pay the $3,600. I'm gonna have my bookkeeper do everything.
It's worth it, man.
Audit, all that stuff, because it's too stressful for me.
Cool. So, like,
you know what I mean?
Like, where can our listeners find you on social media these days?
Social media on Instagram, you can find me at MVB Luxury on Instagram. Also, MattVB757, Matt Van Buren on Facebook. You can follow me. And my website is mvbluxury.phonesites.com, mvbluxury.phonesites.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll put that down in the description below. And I guess before we wrap this up, if there's like one piece of advice that you could give to maybe some listeners out there who are trying to get into entrepreneurship, what would you say to them?
You gotta, it's gonna require probably 5 times more work than you think. And so you need to be prepared to do the work, and you need to be prepared to fail. And I think that's where, like most things in life, people, they can't like you've recruited agents. Like, it's hard to get people to go from a job to a straight commission sales, right? Because they suck for a couple months and they never get over the learning curve, and then they want to run back to their $70,000 a year job, right? I just went through that with an agent last year. And so people can't get out of their own way. It's mainly fear. You just have to overcome fear. And I heard something from a guy, I forget who was it, one of these successful guys. And he said, a lot of people thinks it takes this, and this to make money. The biggest thing it takes to make money is balls, which is, I'm finding that to be true. You know what I mean? And, the more you grab your balls and take risks and put your money up, then, scared money don't make money, as they say.
There you go.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today. It was fun.
Good times.
And if you guys got value out of this video, then don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we will see you guys later.